Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 276 for October 31st, 2023. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about the many ways to do one thing right. So get ready to stand your ground because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Joining me today is Andrew in California.
That's right. Here I am. Hello.
Heather, also in California.
I don't know how to follow that. Hello.
Yeah. And Bill in California.
The third person in California still here.
I know. You guys need to move somewhere else. Anyway.
The traffic's so bad you can't leave.
I know.
Good point.
And Doug over in Scotland.
Hey everyone, guys, are like intros becoming a thing? Are you that guys, like, since I've taken the outros, like your sort of unique intro, is this going to be Andrew's new thing?
It totally is.
I
think so.
Yeah.
We like it. Where are you at, Chris?
I am currently in Minden, Nevada, just south of Reno. We're here for the week until we pick up our RV. We sent our RV in just for some warranty minor stuff while we were gone in Greece. So yeah, I'm back from Greece. We got back on, I guess technically Thursday last a couple days ago, and took about 2 days to get over here. And then we're staying down in a basically kind of a hotel thing for about a week until we pick up our RV. And then we head to Las Vegas for a week, and then we head to the East Coast. So
what part of the East Coast?
We always go to Charlotte for the holidays. So Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where my wife's from.
You're like a complete snowbird. You just, because Carolina could get cold, you can start there around this time of year, but then around Christmas, you really should think about Florida, right?
Well, no, we really snowbirded up. That's East Coast snowbirds. We're West Coast snowbirds because after Christmas, we come back to Arizona.
You nerds.
There's another RVing event we go to in Arizona every year about the middle of the month. And then last year in February, we went down to Mexico with that same group, and we're doing it again this year. So we'll be down in Mexico for the whole month of February. So yeah, we're totally snowbirded up. I know.
So we now know Chris hates snow. He will never see snow.
I love snow. I hate this. I hate it with a passion. Like, I really want to wake up to like a foot of snow, but it also terrifies me to have snow even around the RV.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
So, yeah.
So I would love to hear about your Greece trip. However, I think that I'm going to plug some of your programs. You have some shows that you're talking about your Greece trip, right?
Yes. So if you guys want to know all about Greece and the things that we saw and the places that we went to Croatia, Montenegro, Corfu, the island of Naxos, Crete, and spent about a week in Athens as well. And all of that we've spent talking about on the last few episodes of the Archaeology Show. So take a look at the Archaeology Show, archpodnet.com/archaeology. And I swear to God, like the last 3 or 4 episodes were all Greece. And we're going to have a kind of a special episode next week. And we'll talk about that in a second here. And then after that, our final Greece episode, which will be Athens, the Parthenon, all the stuff that we saw there. So
cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. The special episode next week, we're not doing a special episode this week, although some people may be haunted by past excavations. That was a bad joke, but this releases on Halloween. So there's nothing special about Halloween in CRM, but maybe, I don't know if we can come up with anything or not, but we really can't. So let's talk about this. So I was thinking about this topic for some reason. I don't know. It just popped right back into my head. I had an experience like back in 2008, 2009 timeframe, give or take. It was with a company that we were relatively new with, but my wife and I had quite a bit of experience excavating on the East Coast. Our first 2 or 3 years in CRM were all block excavations, like phase 3 block excavations. And it was that's what our experience was. And so we get out on this project out in the West here. In fact, I think it was in Utah, and we're starting with 1x1s in this little area here. And then we were going to move into possibly some block excavation in another phase or another time. We never did that. It was just the 1x1s. And so the project manager, she's setting us up and she's put us together, and we had, partners, and she's like, hey, you guys, and pointed to me and the person I was working with and said, dig a 1x1 right here. They actually had a nail in the spot where we wanted the northwest corner or whatever it was, because they'd already lined that out with the total station. And we proceeded to set it up, and just from putting our nails in and setting our datum for that particular 1x1, and then we'd correspond the datum for that 1x1 to the site datum, right? So you can get a full vertical elevation for the whole thing. And she just started losing her mind on me because, and the person I was working with also came from the East Coast. And I don't know if that had a factor in it or not, but we were just realizing that there were very different ways to do the same exact thing, right? None of them were wrong, and they were all right? Except the point of this story is the rigidity in you will do it this way because that way is wrong is what I really wanted to talk about here, right? So from setting up excavation units to different things like that, if you've ever worked in more than one state, and I mean more than one state, not just in the Western United States, but if you've worked across the country in a few states, you really start to realize that there's more than one way to do something right? And that's what I want to talk about, Bill.
Just sounds to me like this person was a bad leader. If you were in charge and you were doing something that's pretty regular, making a square with string and some nails, and you're losing your mind over something, I mean, either you got a lot on your plate that no one else knows about, or you're just a really bad supervisor. Yeah.
And I think she was just a really new supervisor. That's what it was, right? Because I was a few years in to a career in CRM, didn't have my master's degree yet, and again, my experience was all East Coast, and she had just gotten her MA, and the whole excavation and sampling strategy was based on a single article that she read in a journal somewhere, and so she was doing this whole sampling strategy based on that. Man. And I think she just really had a lot of pressure on her shoulders and really couldn't handle doing anything differently than she expected it to be done. You know what I mean? So, yeah, Heather.
I don't like to excuse bad behavior. However, I'm trying to look at it from her perspective.
Right.
So when you have a work plan, you have it set up for a certain reason. Now, of course, you need to be flexible because there's discoveries in the field that you need to react to. There's conditions in the field that you need to react to. So you start off with the best of intentions to at least work in that direction with the work plan that you set up. But it is difficult if somebody comes in and says, let's say you have a datum and you're having the datum on one corner, and every unit has to have the datum on that one corner.
Right.
If somebody comes in and says, no, I always put it on the southwest corner. And that's what I do.
Right.
I never waver from that. It's a luck thing or whatever people say, or it's wrong to do it anywhere but the southwest corner. So I think there needs to be some give and take. But when it comes to the person who writes the work plan, that should be the default. But then, of course, in an effort to excavate and actually get the data that you want or that you need, right, to do it in a thorough way, you do need to be flexible from the crew supervisor or the person who's supervising the effort does need to be flexible. Yeah. So I think it sounds like delivery was wrong. And for her to say it's wrong to do it that way is very short-sighted and shows a lack of experience. But I do want to make that point. Yeah.
And as far as something like the datum corner goes, just to bring that up, because that wasn't necessarily an issue with us, only because the person and I that were working, we understood that, hey, this all has to be consistent. Otherwise, they won't know how to plot this thing correctly. Right. So you I don't care what corner you use. Right. It doesn't actually matter as long as they're all the same.
So, that was just an example I used because people like to argue about Adam. Yeah.
Oh, you're totally right. People do argue about it. Yeah. And the big thing before we get to Doug there that her and I kind of threw down about was we had nails in the corner, and they were like the typical like 12-inch galvanized nails that people use. Yeah, well, yeah. So the nail was in the corner. The ground was relatively soft, and it wasn't. She wouldn't let us offset the nails, because when we're just doing a 1x1, I like to use like 8 nails, right? And I'll put them like 10 centimeters past the wall, and then that way your nail's not pulling out, and it's more stable, right? Yeah. And also, just because the ground surface right there was a little bit. It was a little bit. How should I say it? It wasn't very even, and it was difficult to keep it to clean it up from where the datum nail was going to be. So a technique that we've used in the past is basically you set the nail so that your datum is actually at the nail head 10 centimeters above the ground surface, right? And then all your measurements, you're basically just subtracting 10 from all your measurements, and then you've got a ground surface, but your nail's always there, and you test it every once in a while and make sure it hasn't been kicked or moved or something like that. But it's just better than having the string coming across the ground surface right there and being affected by it. You've got it up in the air, it's free, and it's doing its thing. And she just could not handle that. Had to be at the ground surface. And she just was like, all your measurements are going to be wrong. And I was like, well, no, we know how to subtract 10. So, it's not that big a deal.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about the specifics, like what you did, like, quote unquote, wrong.
Yeah.
So your crime, Chris, was that Chris Webster, put a datum at 10 centimeters instead of ground surface. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you backstaked.
Yeah, I tried the backstake. Yeah, she wouldn't let me.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I don't know.
So,
maybe we can
That's
talk
how I do.
offline.
I do both those.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I wonder why I do both.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because it works.
Well,
and I force all my minions to do that.
and also because that's how Andrew taught me.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And before we go to break here, the other thing to learn too, of course, that people who have ever done this longer than 6 minutes knows this, but not all the soil is the same. Not all ground is the same. Not all environments are the same, right?
No.
I know. So you got to use whatever technique works for that situation, And if you're, if you've got a sledgehammer in the nail, you can probably put it right in the corner. It's not going anywhere, right? But if you could just push it in with your hand, then you probably need to backstake that thing because it's just going to pull out 17 times while you're digging. So, all right, let's take a short break and then we'll come back. And Doug had his hand raised, but then he put it down. I'm going to put it back up. Back in a minute.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to the CRM ARC podcast, episode 276. And we are talking about, how there's no one right way to do anything in this whole field. So, and there's definitely different ways that you can do stuff depending on your situation. And Doug, I know you had your hand raised last time, so let's hear your comment. I'm also interested to hear your thoughts in, your CRM experience. I think you worked a lot in like New Mexico, and then also, anything you've done over in Scotland.
Well, so I'll pivot because my other one question when I had my hand raised was actually like, what did you do wrong, Chris? How could you mess up a 1x1?
Right.
And now I understand. Of course, Chris. Of course, it makes sense how you messed it up. Oh man, I see. I'd get really controversial and just be like, you should go with a gridless site.
Ooh.
That would have solved all your problems, except actually probably not back in like 2008. But you should have just been like, no, I refuse the 1x1. We're going gridless. No units at all.
Yeah,
and that's actually like
it's called looting, isn't it, Doug? Isn't that what that's called?
What?
That's called
What's
looting.
It called?
Looting.
No. So like in the Netherlands, they don't do grids. Like this is so I did a whole project. So again, we ran into this sort of this issue of like, what's the best way to do it? We made tutorial videos on, I had a bunch of different countries, Spain, Italy, German language, which was Austrian, but also we had German. So we could cover those slight weird differences in those languages. They're basically the same language. And we had the Dutch as well. And, we had meetings and it was discussions about like, is there a better way of doing it? And actually like, so for the 1x1 video, we do one with like a tape measure. And then we actually do one where you could just use like a planning frame. Like you put a planning frame is 1x1 and you could just drop it down and stick the nails in the corners. And it is so quick. I don't think I'd ever go back to having to measure out, what was it, 161? Yeah, like I have nightmare. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nightmares about doing all the calculations, especially when you get like, ooh, let's do a 1x3 and something like that. No, in the Netherlands, you don't need to do grids, so they shoot in individual artifacts, or so some of it's a difference in archaeology. It's a method. So like, for prehistoric and, North America, you pretty much are lithics and maybe some ceramics, unless you're like in a cave or some other specialty stuff. But, so like you're kind of doing that, like grids to sort of create distribution maps. But even then, like honestly, a 1x1, but with a 10 centimeter spit is pretty much pointless anyways. Like I'm pretty sure most of our 1x1 work, it's arbitrary and does not answer most of the questions you'd be looking to answer with it. I mean, it kind of somewhat makes sense as like an arbitrary thing for maybe shuffle test pitting or something like that, just because you need to have some sort of standard, and 1 meter by 1 meter makes sense. But I also people do 50 by 50 centimeters. It's fairly arbitrary and makes no difference. But yeah, you can totally do like literally. They were very shocked when they're like, you have pegs and nails in your site? The tripping hazards. And why would you do that? Like the Dutch were they're very Dutch. So matter of fact of like, well, that's just stupid.
Okay. Well, speaking from somebody who comes from Dutch ancestry, a little more diplomatic than that, but I do understand. I understand. I'm not. Now that all makes sense. Now that I'm Dutch, it makes all anyway. I think that there's a huge difference. I mean, obviously, let's just kind of go to the other spectrum. Greece, where you were just at, or Egypt. They don't typically, they're not doing these large grids with, 1x1s. Typically, they work based on discovery. And I see that is starting to change, even in California, where, we do a lot of work based on discovery. Just these hard grids that you don't move from, because you want to have the sample size. And, I don't think that anybody does it that rigidly anymore. Yeah. From my experience. But there's a complete difference. There are reasons why we do what we do in America and in California, especially when it comes to prehistoric, because we have no idea what we're looking for sometimes. And what we find can be so small and easy to not find, if you don't do it right. So, and you need to have a sample size, a representative sample size. So, I think there's reasons, and I think this just goes to the theme of this podcast, is that there are reasons why conditions will motivate your work plan. It all has to be based on what you're dealing with. You have to make a work plan. You can't be rigid, but at the same time, you do have to, if you have a work plan and takes into account all the conditions and the potential that you could be of what you could find and what you're looking for, then I think you do need to have some systematic approach so that the data in the end, I mean, the worst thing, right, is we get back to the lab, we don't know what we're looking at. So that's why you do have to be somewhat rigid, but you have to also be flexible based on conditions and what you're dealing with. So.
Sure. Doug?
Also, like, I think part of this is literally the last 15 years or so, like a grid, measuring everything out makes a lot of sense if you go back pre-digital, and like you actually still had to like measure out maps, and a grid was incredibly helpful for that, and accuracy was greatly improved on site plans. But yeah, these days technology is such that like even like the GPS units, you can get like sub-centimeter accuracy and just shoot in everything with some of those units. So it made sense years ago, and I think some of that is like a holdback of like, actually, yeah, if you don't have the technology and you're still doing everything by hand, yes, you definitely need a grid, or yeah, you could kind of try to do it without, but like your life would be made so much easier. There's some questions sort of going in the chat, and one question is like the Bill had was like, with like the grid list, do they even do square units? No, you don't. Like the idea behind grid lists is you don't actually have units like that. And I've actually seen excavations so in certain soils, obviously with a grid, you're like, oh, all the sides should be like, it should be a square, it should be straight. And then we've all been through that, where like loose soils, you start going down and then like your sides start coming down with you and they collapse. But I've seen some excavations where it's circle units, because a circle physics basically it keeps the sides from collapsing. And so, like, depending on your soil and how far you're going down, I've seen for health and safety reasons, you do circle trenches. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And like, so with a gridless site, you strip back areas, and because you're shooting in all the points. So if you're finding any features, if you're finding any artifacts, you can shoot in. You can make the most random. They tend to end up being sort of squarish, rectangle excavations anyways, because that's just easy. But like you could do a Snoopy designed trench. Like you could get creative like as you want, like start doing crop circle style trenches. There's nothing like there's no reason why you need to have a straight trench for most everything you're doing. So yeah, you can have wiggly lines, and you just go and shoot it in with your GPS, or I guess if you're a slightly older school, total station. And I guess if you really wanted to, you could do a tape measure and plane table and all that sort of stuff. It's a lot harder, but yeah, man, there is no reason why you actually need to have square trenches. I see all the hands going up, so I feel like people are going to yell at me.
It's pretty much on fire, but what's crazy is I've already done this too before, and I absolutely get what you're saying. The only time you're really using those square units or rectangular units is when you think you want to get some kind of a volumetric sample.
Yes, thank you.
Right. In case
it's much easier.
If you've stripped down to the level where the features are at, you can't really run the backhoe back over archaeology. Yes. So if you've bisected all these different post holes and features, but there's more down below, then somehow you have to get down there, and people digging trenches or shovel probes or something like that straight down is the way that you see if there's more layers below that. So I get it. And actually it is way better. It is way better to just shoot in features and stuff and dig them haphazardly or however you want, because you're really going for the shape of the feature rather than some arbitrary square.
Yeah. Right. But there is a balance, as we listen to Doug's European postmodern psychobabble on archaeology. I would say that there is balance, because I've seen, you can easily see how this would go too far the other way too, and it's kind of like, I think what Heather was saying before, you just sort of have to match what you're doing to the scene at hand, always thinking with a little bit of science though. I don't like just a sort of free for all. We just shoot them in because we got modern technology to the sub-centimeter. I'm like, yeah, until all that stuff breaks. Like, why don't we just go old school? We'll put some 1x1s out, thoughtfully placed, and we can dig them with old tools, and that's completely fine. And in my experience, I much prefer that to like this week's ideology that will be foolish next week.
So I believe this episode started with, there's no wrong way to do something. That's because you just turned into me about doing gridless sites. I feel like I've pushed the limit of there's no wrong way to do something.
There's a caveat to that. I mean, as long as you, again, go back to your strategy and whatever, as long as you have a really good strategy, to start off with, the research design to start off with. And if every action and decision in the field is based on that and willingness to be flexible as you come across, with discovery. If you stick with that, then you can be flexible. But that's why research design is so important.
Right. That's what I would say.
So I'm 100% with Heather on this. But I'd also say that, unfortunately, and I get what you guys are saying about like volumetric and sampling and stuff. But I honestly think that in a lot of ways, people don't engage with that enough when thinking about it, because you have people who will be like, yeah, we're doing volume, and it's a number of lithics per unit to try to get a distribution map and stuff like that. But like 1 meter by 10 centimeters doesn't answer a lot of questions, a lot of research questions you'll have. And actually, to be honest, like, how many site reports have you guys actually, like, we always take these measurements. Occasionally there's a distribution map in a site report. For the most part, a lot of those measurements of like, this spit and this grid, or this unit had 150 lithics or something like that. We take a lot of those measurements, but they never actually make it into the report. I'd say is like there's definitely a hold on to like a 1 meter as like the standard, when not necessarily that should be the standard, depending on the questions you have.
I disagree. I think you need some sort of standard just to go with. It's okay. I understand it's a bit arbitrary or whatever, but it's so much better to have some sort of unit standard, And what's funny is I'm playing the part of the more rigid guy in this, and I'm usually not that guy, in this world. I'm very much into dealing with what happens in the moment. But I think we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, be like, oh, 1 by 1s, they're so last century. It's like, no. They work well. And also you keep saying that like, oh, they don't answer the research questions. Sure they do. I guess the only time they wouldn't answer is if you were so rigid that you only dug your square in your preconceived spot, even though you could see that all the artifacts were 14 meters away. But I must follow my rigid science guidelines. Then I understand.
Yeah, but what questions do they answer?
Well, what questions are you talking about? Because all you keep saying is like, well, they just don't answer the questions. Like what?
Okay, so like the only reason
you put them in the right spot.
No, you're thinking, but you could put any size, shape, trench anywhere to answer that.
Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing I think we also need to remember is that we're not just looking at what we are specifically. I don't know. I'm not going to say this right, but we're looking at our strategy, but we're also trying to remember that there are things and technologies that are going to come, in the future, that we're collecting information with that in mind too. So sometimes you're collecting information that you're not going to do anything with, but we have it in case, in the future.
Yeah.
Something can be done. So.
Okay. With that and the, discussion at hand, let's take this over to segment 3 and wrap this up. Back in a minute.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of business, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our MBA degree program is 100% online, with emphases in business analytics and finance to help you reach your goals. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
All right, welcome back to Zero Mark Podcast, episode 276. And okay, so from the last segment, we really get into this thing. And on the one hand, Doug, I totally understand what you're saying, because with modern technology, with the ability to, literally sub-centimeter shoot in every single thing that you find in a relatively quick and easy way, is there a reason for, putting everything into grids in certain circumstances, right? And it's been brought up, and I do have to echo this too as a business owner. Sometimes you have to account for what you're doing, and it can't just be, you really have to say, I dug this much in volume. And that was mentioned before as well. So if you've got those kinds of constraints, you need an efficient way to measure that volume. And maybe you're just going to do some photogrammetry on it, on your big circular spiral hole. And then, you can get volume that way. But the easier way is to do it in a grid. So one thing that was being mentioned over the break was, how do we teach this? So how could you teach somebody?
Yeah, I'm keenly interested in this aspect too, because if I'm just following what folks are doing here, what I've been seeing folks do in the United States, and I've got students who, they're going to work all around the world. They're going to work wherever they can find jobs. I don't want them to show up to these European sites or these other sites in other places and this be like something where the crew chief goes off on them the same way they did on Chris, because they don't know this new technique. So, how do you teach this?
Well, there's a couple of things to break down. One is this is a very Dutch way of doing it. We still do a lot of grids in the UK. There's still a lot of grids in other places, and not different countries are different things. And they've been like that since archaeology became much more formulated. And I like how you guys are describing this as a loose sort of thing, but the Dutch way of doing archaeology is so prescriptive. They have a 200-page manual that is in version 6 or something, or 7, of how you do archaeology. And it is incredibly prescriptive, but they do it because it works. And it's pretty easy to teach, because you're basically, I get where Chris was saying, it's just really easy to pull out, I dug so many squares and we went down this depth and now I can quickly calculate it. But if you think about the time it takes to set up a 1x1, and then someone to come over and be like, that's a diamond because you didn't do it right. And all the time for that, setting up a 1x1, we all do it. We're all pretty pros at it, but it still takes a couple of minutes, and you can literally shooting in with a GPS, send one person around, and the time, you're actually going to save more time of just shooting in, or photogrammetry. So a big new thing is just doing photogrammetry, and in that software, do a couple of shots of your trench. So you get a lot more out of it because you can get all your photos at that time too. You can get a 3D model if you need to. And then you can literally just pull out the volume out of the thing. So it's not quite simpler. It's just going back to the topic of this episode, it's a different way of doing it. And in terms of teaching it, I think I'm slightly confusing, but imagine instead of doing 1x1s, you had a trench that was 1.6 meters by 2.4. It's still a square. It still works. You're still excavating to an area, especially if there's a lot of topsoil and you've used some sort of, backhoe to just pull it back, and you've basically scraped back to an area. So especially if you have a lot of overburden that you maybe need to go down half a meter or something like that, you just scrape down and then you go in there, and you can also scrape back at layers. So I think maybe we're saying the wrong things, but earlier where people were talking about going down, there's features below. Yeah, having a square that's 1x1 or a square that's 2 by 1.83 or something makes absolutely no difference unless you're doing all your calculations by hand at the end. You're not going to teach it any different. You say you are excavating the areas that make sense, and you stop, so if you're digging features, you stop. Let's be honest, it's CRM. So we kind of say you put it in 1x1s, but your site ends at the end of the site. So if you're doing a pipeline, I don't know, you have so many meters on each side that you're allowed to excavate, and then as soon as you hit that line, you stop. Even if you found the most amazing I don't know, Ancestral Pueblo village, and you've just hit the corner of it, but if it goes outside of your excavation area for CRM, Yeah, that's nice. You can maybe someone at a university, most likely pot hunters will get to it first, can go back in like 80 years and dig it. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. So you have your line, you have your project area laid out, and you can sort of divide that up into a bunch of 1x1 squares, or you could just make a giant trench or a bunch of smaller ones or round ones, or as Chris said, our spiral trench of fun. Like it doesn't, teaching it's not going to be any different than teaching 1x1s, except that you're not teaching someone, you need to put in your nails here, and then, you use 2 tape measures or 1 tape measure and string. And that's the only difference is just like, make a line somewhere, make a line that makes sense. And like with a trench, we expand it by like, oh, we need to expand this trench by like another 1x1 square, and then another 1x1 square. Or you could just be like, hey guys, let's just keep digging until we, like 3 meters out or 2.5, or it could be arbitrary. It's where the archaeology is. It's not necessarily, you need to fit that into a nice 1x1.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Heather.
I think this goes for anything in life. You have to master the easy first. And so when you're teaching, to answer Bill's question, when you're teaching people, they need to master something first in order to learn how to do this. And when you're teaching, you're looking for mastery of that skill while also teaching the spirit why you're doing it. But you need to master the skill before you can start playing around. Because if you throw people out doing Snoopy units, which I love that idea, or you throw them out doing spiral units or whatever, that is for people who are at the level that they can play with those. Like, there's got to be some, like Andrew said, some science to it. And the only way to teach people is to have them master on something that is certain. And that is that 1 square unit is one of the easiest ways to do that. And then once they've mastered it, then they can start, I'm not saying playing like they're not thinking about it, but then they can start moving off of that 1x1. But you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that is such a great point, right? You need that building block to go further. Absolutely. And it's so teachable. It gets you so much bang for the buck, learning the 1x1s. I do really enjoy teaching them. And I would say one other thing about the really wild, spiral digs or whatever. Imagine reading that report like 10 years later. And you're like, oh, God, they did this stupid because you can't then compare it to other stuff in the area, and I get it. If you're following a feature or something, that's different. We all understand that. But there is something to be said about the sort of old school way. And that doesn't mean that, I'm all of a sudden shouting, you're doing it wrong. But on the flip side, if I'm not using the Dutch manual, I'm not doing it wrong either. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that if stuff's changing, man, and if you got a situation where the backhoe just strips down to the level that the cultural layer, and then somebody's flying a drone and just shooting in every single thing, and somehow magically you've got a phone or a tablet or something that is seriously within a centimeter. Because that's what we're talking about here. I'm teaching people to get this thing within a centimeter or so of error. Yeah. And so if you got a thing that's doing all that and it's shooting down a laser dot or a spray paint exact location of exactly where your stuff's supposed to be at, and they tell you, bisect this thing, or I want you to dig a Snoopy right here, and it traces the Snoopy with a LED on the ground, and you can do that, then who are we to tell people to keep doing the square if now just all the robots are going to set everything up and someone just teaches them how to dig whatever they've got, right? Like 10 years from now, imagine them reading our stuff and being like, oh God, they're still doing the 1900 squares. Boy, oh boy.
but there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason. How many CRM companies have all that technology? If you throw students in and say, it could be this, it could be that, and you're not teaching them something that they can at least master. I'm not saying that you're stuck with these 1x1s, but you got to teach them with something. And if somebody's come up with a better way, great, let's do it. But let's not do it for change's sake, just so that we can have something different. Let's come up and thoughtfully come up with something. If something comes up and it's better, then fine, let's go with it. But I mean, we're talking about all these technologies that a majority of CRM companies, especially small ones, do not have. So when you have that technology, then you can work with that technology, but we still have to be producing students, people going into the field that know how to do the basics.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Doug.
Just one last thing is like, okay, I was being facetious with the whole Snoopy. Like, guys, it's physics.
We know that, Doug.
No matter what, you're not doing a spiral. It's basically going to be squares. It's going to be squares or rectangles, but just it doesn't have to be measured exactly by 1 meter. You could do centimeters. Maybe I should rephrase this. It's not gridless. It's more precise archaeology. It's instead of being stuck at like a 1 meter scale, you're going down to centimeter or millimeter scale. And so you're just being better.
There we go.
Good politician.
I love it.
Right. So I think what our big takeaways from this episode are, just like I said in the beginning, there is no one right way to do things. And really what you should let guide your methodology is your research questions. What are your research questions? What are you trying to answer? And what is the best absolute way to answer those research questions? And also not just your research questions, but your design as well and your proposal. Who's funding this thing and how are they paying for it, right? What are they expecting to see? Are they expecting to see, 100 cubic meters of soil come out of the ground? Well, you better be able to measure 100 cubic meters. You don't have to do that in squares, but you better be able to measure that, right? And not go over that or do something with it. So, and then, using the right tool for the right job. So I think this was a great discussion. I thought maybe it would be, maybe one segment where we talked about this, but I never underestimate you guys. I shouldn't. We managed to keep it going.
Capacity to BS.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're hearing this, of course you are, because you're listening to it. Comment on, Facebook, wherever you found it. Share this out on some of the groups out there and comment. You can also go to arcpodnet.com/ what is it? CRM Archaeology Podcast? I don't know. Go find the CRM Arc Podcast on ArcPodNet, and then you can comment right on the episode. So I'm interested to hear other people's thoughts on this. And with that, we will see you guys next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening.
See you guys next time after I finish reading this Dutch field book.
Oh, it's no longer a book. It's actually online now. They've updated it. Yeah, the whole website.
As soon as I finish reading this online article.
So 20th century.
Yeah. No, they used to have a manual. They literally used to have a physical manual.
I've been doing it all wrong.
Version 1. Yeah.
All right. This goodbye turned into bonus content. All right.
I'll just say, I need to say my goodbye, which is just going to be like, stay Snoopy, people.
I thought it would be Totsines.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.